We've been doing head coaching approval ratings. Now, this is not a nationwide thing. This is not like if you're the president and they ask everyone, do you approve or disapprove? If I'm asking about a coach, I don't really care about the nation. I really care about that coach's fan base. So we worked, 6 coaches from the SEC in the other night. I wanted to do another 6. I wanted to start with Kalen DeBoer. I've got him at 80%. I got DeBoer polling at a strong 80% amongst Alabama fans right now. I think it's largely understood 2025 is the green light year. Of course, Nick Saban had trouble polling at 90+% amongst Alabama folks. So if you're not Nick Saban and you haven't won a national title, you're not going to be polling at 90%, which is where our approval meter maxes out here, by the way. So I think a lot of folks understand, all right, last year was what it was. You replace a legend. You come in. Also, the portal and pre- and post-spring, it's kind of sitting there and the players could bail on you and you kind of got what you got year one. Yeah. Okay, all that's well and good. So 2025 is the pivot year. Because I promise you, if they go 8-4 or even 9-3 this year, if they miss the playoffs, that number would plummet. Is that fair? Probably not. It kind of is. I don't think they'd complain about it. I think the one thing I've picked up on being around Kalen DeBoer is the whole you don't want to take over for a legend thing is lost on him. He's not just coach speaking you when he says that stuff. He could not care less about it. What he cared about, what anybody who's an alpha competitor cares about is, do I have the tools? Will I be given the tools? As long as I'm given the tools, I couldn't care less who I'm following, whether it was a dumpster fire or whether it was a dynasty. I'll forge my own legacy. He really feels that way. I think those fans respect that about him. And I think, ultimately this year, you're wondering things about them. Will they be able to run the ball like they did? Of course, the quarterback question is still there. And, if he is what we think he is as an offensive head coach, if Ryan Grubb is what we think he is as a coordinator who's been brought in by that head coach and they've worked together before, that offensive profile will be fine. And they'll be a 10-plus win team, and they'll be in the SEC race and the national title race. And if that's the case, then, well, somehow, some way you backfilled successfully from the greatest of all time. I think it's only at 80% because I think a lot of people were turned off by that Vanderbilt loss. Not a lot. Well, yeah, you were all turned off by it. Some people probably were turned off by it enough to say, yeah, I'm still not sold on this DeBoer guy. This ain't Seattle, I think was said more than a few times around Tuscumbia and Opp and Andalusia and Livingston. I'm going to stop naming towns in Alabama now, but you get the point. What about Lane Kiffin? Oh, my nose itches. What about our friend there in Oxford? Lane Kiffin's approval rating amongst Ole Miss fans, he will be happy to know, is 85%. That's about as high as anyone has polled in Oxford, Mississippi in a long time. 85% amongst the Ole Miss fan base. Why? Well, because they're in pretty rarefied air. Think about the conversations Ole Miss is in. They didn't make the playoff last year, and it was a big disappointment. And you know what? It should have been. But think about that. And we're not talking about LSU here. We're talking about Ole Miss. I don't care how big the playoff is. For them to just assume they should be in, for the nation to be assuming they should be in, well, that's because of that guy right there. That's because of what Lane Kiffin's done with that program. So much is said about Lane Kiffin in an extracurricular manner that people forget, hey, he's a pretty good football coach. Built a really good program there. He's done it in an atypical fashion. He hasn't stacked top 7 recruiting classes on top of each other like pancakes because he knows that's not the kind of restaurant they're running there, or to put it better, it's not the kind of restaurant college football is allowing them to run right now. So he's done it via the portal, sort of had to make their own way. He's done it. I think they've appreciated that about him. I also think no matter how much validity there was or wasn't any given case, his name's been out there for other jobs, and he hasn't gone. Again, forget about the details. If I'm an Ole Miss fan, I just know our coach is winning, he's in demand, but he's still here. And Kiffin has done a phenomenal job endearing himself to the community. Let me cut in really quick and ask, look, prayer hands, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you think you're subscribed, check and make sure. Over 50% of you aren't. It's free, it doesn't sign you up for anything, and it helps us keep the show free, college football year-round, the way God intended it. All right, back to the clip. Like to convincing people, and I think there's a lot of authenticity in this of when I got here, it was a job. Now it's kind of a home. I don't think that's fake. I think there's a lot of authenticity to that. I think if you played him a clip of himself saying that 5 years ago, he wouldn't believe it. Those are his words to speak, not mine, but I believe that about him. So he's polling sky high, man. He's worked it very well there. Now, when I go up the road to Fayetteville, Arkansas, I can't say the same thing. Sam Pittman, love him though I may, is polling at a dismal 15% right now amongst Arkansas fans. They haven't spent a single week in the top 25 the past 3 years. Paper pop for all the wrong reasons. They're in the bottom quarter of the SEC right now. They always have a tough schedule because the league office hates them, and this year's no different. And the other part about it is this is always a precursor to bad news. When you get this far in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years in, and I don't really know what the identity of your program is, that's not a good thing, especially when I look at the O-line. I know this has been a big gripe amongst Arkansas fans. If nothing else, we should have dominant offensive line play under Sam Pittman. I think that's a completely fair expectation for them. They haven't really had that. And so it's completely understandable. When you get paid what Sam Pittman gets paid, I can assure you this is not something he shies away from. The expectation thing, when you get paid what he gets paid, you don't shy away from it. You can't afford to. I look at this upcoming year, and I don't really do hot seat segments here, but his job's in a state of flux coming into this year. I think most people around there know that. Their over-under win total's 5.5. There's a world where they hit the over and he still loses it. There's been a lot of buyout waiting and seeing up there, and so now they're kind of in the range where I think they can afford to make a move if they want to, and we'll see. I mean, because we were talking that way about Billy Napier as recently as during last season, and he pulled the nose up big time. And the other thing about Sam Pittman is everyone's pulling for him there. Nobody hates him. That's not the case at all. Quite the opposite. The Arkansas folks were pulling extra hard for him because he's one of them. I'm pulling for him because he fits. You know I have the special corner of my heart for guys like Beamer at South Carolina or Kenny at Arizona State or Sam Pittman at Arkansas, the places where it just feels like hand in glove. The fit is so wonderful. I think that's great for college football. But you still got to win. And they're not winning enough at Arkansas right now, so that's why he's polling at 15%. Hugh Freeze at Auburn. We got Hugh Freeze polling at 40% approval amongst Auburn folks. Now, it's very mixed, obviously. And I think if we were to break that down, the 40% that are supporting him, as opposed to the 60% that would be given a thumbs down right now, are probably people who are keenly aware of how bad a state that roster was in when he took over. This is big boy college football. It's the SEC, and there's a sizable contingent of your fan base whenever you get paid a lot of money that doesn't care to hear what kind of rebuild you inherited. They think, well, if I'm only paying you $3 million, you could tell me about a rebuild. But if I'm paying you 3 times that much, I don't care. Get it done now. That's not the way the world works, but it is the way a lot of fans think. And so there is a chunk of the Auburn fan base. I'm not even here to tell them they're wrong. They can feel however they feel. They look at it and they say, hey, we ought to be winning by year 3. We should not have some losing record in year 3. And you know what? To that, you're not wrong. But I think that's why this season becomes a really, really big wild card. And I also think there's a minority chunk, but a chunk nonetheless of the fan base that says Harsin left him nothing. I'll just tell you this, to the 40% there, if you want some wind in your sails, that's what other coaches say about Freeze and Auburn. Other coaches, you get them off the record, they look at Freeze and Auburn and say, yeah, that was going to take him a little while. They were not in a good spot at all. That's the words of other coaches, not him. He of course, is not going to make excuses for himself. I think he's done a really good job of trying to present the idea, the reality of what the situation has been. But see, here's the thing. You can have all your one-possession losses, or you can be bitten by the turnover bug, or by injuries, or by the fabled Bob stat, bounce of ball, and it doesn't go your way, and you're 6-7 instead of 9-3. All right, but there is no fan base at this level of competition that has room for those excuses year 3 and beyond. And I think that's fair, because I think this era of college football affords you the ability to totally overturn a roster and reinvent a program in a 36-month period. Could be faster if you were left with a better roster, but he wasn't. So it was going to take 3 years. Now, if you've listened to him talk recently, he knows that. And I think everyone around there knows that. And if you do nothing more than tell me Jackson Arnold's going to pan out at quarterback, I'll tell you that they're going to be in contention for the SEC championship. If you were to tell me that, I know that's a big statement, but the fan base believes that. I kind of believe that, but I'm not the one getting polled here. The fan base is. Hugh Freeze has still got an opportunity to be one of like the most universally beloved coaches by his own fan base in that entire league. Got to get it done this year. Mike Elko, only in his second year at Texas A&M, they went 8-5 last year. I've got him polling at 70%. Could be higher. We could have gotten, faulty statistics. The West Texas contingent could have soiled our sample size here. So who knows? Maybe Elko's polling at higher than 70%. I think some of those precincts close to like Alito, places like that, still not reporting. Perfect fit though. Another perfect fit. Guy that really, really uniquely gets Texas A&M because he was there before. He was a guy that when he was brought in, on the surface, looked like he was inheriting a very, very loaded roster, but he wasn't. He was inheriting a roster with some guys on it that were formerly highly rated in recruiting, but recruiting is one part of the way you measure the ability of a player. The other parts that you really can't quantify in a recruiting ranking, a lot of the guys on that roster didn't have. Frankly, that's why Jimbo was able to get a lot of them. And so he had to flush probably a bigger portion of the program, if you will, players and otherwise, than the outside world probably expected. I think A&M fans know that. A&M folks follow their program very closely. So they were also happy to have a no-nonsense guy in there. If you know Mike Elko, you ought to be extremely happy in getting a guy who is supremely advanced in evaluation and development. That's why the guy was a hit at Duke immediately. And it's why he'll win, I think, at Texas A&M. I'm saying this not just to give you my personal feel on it. I think that's how the fan base out there feels. So last year, they would have loved to have been better. But at the same time, I think they're looking, and especially the way he just totally took like ownership and control of the blame about how bad the defense was late last year. If Mike Elko is pissed off about defense for an 8-month period, I've got confidence that statistic, that metric will tick up fairly quickly. I think the fan base feels that way. So I'd put him at 70%. And then the other one that's a total wild card this year, Brent Venables at Oklahoma. Got him polling at 40%. Does that sound about right? Maybe not. Chickasha, Lawton, Enid, you guys need to check in out there. There's a dynamic here that's interesting about Venables. The fan base got their man. When Lincoln Riley bailed on him and went out west, they wanted Brent Venables, and they got him. It's not like you wanted one person and the administration went out and hired someone else and just threw him in there and said, you better like this guy. You got who you wanted. So there's a little baked-in sense of ownership amongst the fan base about Venables. Having said that, it's big boy football. Everyone understands what time it is. And you go 6-7 to 10-3, and you enter last year, and everyone thought it was off to the races. Offense was a disaster, and it never really got off the ground. In fact, it went 6 feet below ground. So the question becomes, how much of last year was just a total reflection of the program versus how much of last year was a reminder about how important the quarterback position is, and if you don't have it figured out, you don't have anything figured out. I think most of the fan base is still willing to lean towards the latter, but with the caveat that you better show me this year. So Venables went out and he got John Mateer at quarterback from Washington State, and he got Ben Arbuckle at coordinator from Washington State. And if it really was just a quarterback problem, we'll know, because they'll come out of the gate hot, because that defense should be good. That receiver room should be good. QB offensive coordinator combo should be good. And you know what? If that's the case, that number goes quickly up from 40% up to 70+%, because they'll be right back in the mix. But they got Auburn in there in week 4. They got Michigan in there in week 2. They play Texas in week 6. So their second, fourth, and sixth games, we will be doing periodic check-ins there, as will the fan base. It's just such a huge fork in the road year. Huge fork in the road year for Brent Venables. You want to talk about an A-B scenario. I don't know, Freeze is like this, Venables is like this, about how different the outlook on them and their programs could be based off the next 12 games. To an extent, that's everybody. Billy Napier's like that. To an extent, that's everybody. But it doesn't really matter much what Ryan Day does his next 12 games. Just candidly. Kirby is probably safe. Dabo, legacy secured no matter what happens their next 12 games. Brent Venables, Hugh Freeze, not so much. Still got to get it done.